Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast from Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy in the ordinary, find moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about when we talk about faith.
Welcome. Hi, my name is Shannon White. I'm the interim pastoral associate here at Round Hill Community Church. It's wonderful to have you back on this Round Hill Media podcast. And today, Leslie is not with us on camera because she's producing, but I am interviewing a longtime friend and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Ann Coffman. Ann is the senior, and has been for some time, the senior pastor at Wilton Congregational Church. And she's also a spiritual director. But in the last couple of years, she's been studying the Enneagram. And Ann is here to talk to us about the Enneagram. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with you guys.
Thank you. So first of all, tell us what the Enneagram is.
The Enneagram is a map. If you see one of the Enneagons, we call it, the diagram of the Enneagram, it's a circle that has 9 points on it. And each of those points is a type, an Enneatype, we call it, which is an ego structure or character type. Each of those points, each Enneatype has some characteristics that are unique to them. And it's really the Enneagram. You'll see lines that connect it and everything. And it's a map on each of our own operating systems.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the Enneagram has been making its rounds around houses of faith over the years. Why is that? Why is it especially interesting to faith communities?
I think it's become very interesting to faith communities because aside from the psychological aspects about ourselves and others that we learn from the Enneagram or can learn from the Enneagram, we can really go deeper in our own spirituality through the use of the Enneagram, doing Enneagram work. And I think that that's why faith communities are using it. It's also very helpful if you know about if you work with a group of people, which many of us do, if you understand and know their Enneagram type.
And say more about that. How does that help if you know their type?
Well, each type has its own deeper motivation, and that's one of the wonderful things about the Enneagram is that a lot of times we don't understand what is deeply motivating us. We'll understand sort of the more surface things, but we don't get down to the deeper motivations, and that's what the Enneagram helps us to do. And if we understand that about ourselves and also about others, we tend to have a lot more compassion for ourselves and others if we understand what's deeply motivating us.
Well, we all know in houses of worship that they're kind of like family systems, right? People act in so many different ways. So understanding perhaps how someone else is responding and understanding their Enneagram type may help the life of that community, right?
Very much so, yes.
Interesting. Okay, so is it kind of like a spiritual Myers-Briggs?
It is kind of like a spiritual Myers-Briggs, but it actually goes even deeper than a Myers-Briggs in the sense that Myers-Briggs is really looking at your behaviors and how you appear to the world, where the Enneagram is kind of taking that information and going really deep under the surface to find out what your as I said before, your deepest motivations. And as you go even deeper, you can find out and understand the aspects of God that most resonate with you and why that is.
So interesting. So can you give us an example of something that someone might uncover in terms of the aspects of God and how that might relate?
Yes. Type 1, which is the number 1 point on the Enneagram, is a type that the motivation for that type is the focus of attention for that type is to make things better, to make things right, to improve. And so they struggle. Each Enneagram type has something that is their main vice and then a virtue that they're striving for. And for a type 1, that vice is anger. For a type 1, the anger doesn't usually appear in things like angry outbursts or anything like that, but you will get with type 1s often kind of a frustration or an irritation. which can be off-putting sometimes to other people. But if you understand that what's going on with the type 1 is that they want to make things better, that is truly their motivation. The aspect of God that they resonate with, the holy idea that motivates them deeply, is the idea of God as perfection. Now, we all know that God has many different aspects, um, but as you work with the Enneagram, you understand that each type sees one of those and really resonates with it. It's not that they're not intellectually aware that, yes, God is more than just perfection. God is love, and God is all creator and all kinds of things. But for an Enneagram type 1, that aspect of holy perfection is driving them. And
So interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I talked about their vice of anger and how it appears as frustration or irritation. But the other thing about the type 1 is they're striving for serenity. And so for the type 1s, the serenity prayer, for example, is really deeply profound, even more so than it is for other types.
Are people generally one type, or could they be a couple of types? For someone that's totally new to the Enneagram, how do you know what type you are?
Generally, people are one type. In fact, I really don't know anybody that would be more than one type, but we connect with other aspects and other types on the Enneagram. And I know that you're going to have a picture of the Enneagram available for people to see it. And you'll see these lines connecting types. You'll also see that on either side of each type are two other types, and we connect more closely with those types. Those are called our wings. The types that have the lines drawn between them are called resource points. Um, and those are all types that we can take aspects of those and deploy them in ourselves and in our own lives. And as you go deeper in the Enneagram, you can find that even each individual type can appear differently depending on which instincts are dominant in us. That's kind of deeper Enneagram stuff. But it is really important to remember that each of us is an individual, unique person. So even though we might be the same type and we'll have definite aspects about ourselves that are very similar, each of us is very individual. There's no, all nines do not look alike, all ones do not look alike, all fours do not look alike.
Thank you for mentioning the 4 because I am a 4. Anne came and did a workshop here at the church with the staff. And I had done some work previously, well, actually for many years, with the Enneagram, and I already knew I was a 4, but the 4s. All right, so anyway, I won't go into the 4 right now, but would you tell us a little, like a sentence maybe about each type? And then is there a test to take that kind of, for someone to determine?
Yes, I can certainly do that. We talked about type 1 already. Type 2 is known as the giver, and they tend to be extremely caring people, and they tend to focus in on key people and are very caring and giving towards them. Their vice is pride, their virtue is humility. Um, and they're very caring, giving people. Threes, their focus of attention is achievement, having success, and their vice is vanity, and their virtue is honesty. Sometimes it can be hard for threes in their striving for success, and they work extremely hard to really know what they want. They want because they tend to want whatever is going to make them successful, and that might not be what they actually really want deep in their souls. Type fours are known as the romantic, is one of the things that they're called. They tend to feel emotions very deeply, um, and their focus of attention is what is missing. Their vice tends to be envy. I should say your vice, and all types.
Thanks, Anne.
Sorry about that,
We'll get
Shannon.
to your number in a minute.
Yeah, I know, and then you can talk about me. But anyway, and when we say envy, that's we're talking about a comparing mind.
Yes.
If a four will look and say, "I see everything that's here, but what's missing?" what's not here right now. And the virtue is equanimity, and you said this to me, Shannon, it's beautiful, wearing life like a loose garment. I love that phrase. Um, Enneatype 5 uh, tends to focus on conserving inner resources. So fives are very conscious of how much energy they're going to have throughout the day. So, for example, when you're with a five, you might notice they don't laugh a lot. They might not, or they might just be very conserving of their energy in all types of ways. Um, so that's a type 5. And then type 6 is the loyal skeptic. Their vice is fear, and their virtue is courage. Um, Type 6s tend to be, as their name implies, extremely loyal, but their focus of attention is how can I be safe? What do I need to do to have security in all the ways that that means? And then types is really focused. They're called um, the Epicure, and they focus on having new and really enjoyable experiences. So they try a lot of different things, and they can often be very creative. But their vice is gluttony, and that doesn't really mean eating usually. What it means is they just want more of everything. Everything they just want more, and so for them. Constancy, or sometimes called sobriety, is their virtue, is learning to be happy with enough. Um, and then eights are often called, well, they're the kind of the strong people, and they focus on who has the power, and they tend to be very protective. And rules don't always, they appreciate why we have rules, but they don't always feel that the rules apply to them. Um, and they tend to struggle with their vice. They struggle with me see here. I'm Here we are. They struggle with lust, and lust is not the sexual in the sexual way that we often think of it. Lust is wanting whatever they want. They want it now, right now. Um, I often tell the story of one of my Enneagram teachers who is a type 8 who said, "Anne, this is lust. It's a hot summer day, and I want a blizzard from Dairy Queen, and I want it now." So yeah, so that's eights, and then their virtue is innocence. To be able to live in innocence is an achievement really for an eight. And then nine, which is my type, is known as the mediator or the peacemaker. And what we tend to strive for is harmony. Our motivation is to have harmony, create harmony, to live in harmony. Um, and our vice is sloth, which I struggled with for many, many years, but it is true. And sloth is not so much laziness, is a just forgetting, a self-forgetting, not doing the things that need to be done because um, I'm just not doing them. So we tend to be very a self-forgetting type. And our virtue is right action, which means to do the right thing, which can be challenging for nines. So that's a tour of the Enneagram.
It's so interesting. And one of the things that I remember reading about it, which I felt so good about, was that there are no right or wrong ones, right? All of them are needed to see the full face of God, is what I read at one point. And who are some of the big authors in the Enneagram work that you would recommend to people to kind of look up?
Great, yes. I would really recommend Helen Palmer's work. She wrote some of the early books in the 70s, early 80s on the Enneagram, and there's a whole wonderful history of the Enneagram that goes back centuries. But some of the more recent work, Helen Palmer has a wonderful couple of books on the Enneagram. Beatrice Chestnut, I love her name, B. Chestnut has a great book called The Complete Enneagram, which is very much in depth and goes into gives a good overview, but also goes very deep. And then there's a wonderful little book by Dr. David Daniels and Virginia Price called The Essential Enneagram. It's a little yellow book. It costs less than $10, and it's about 100 pages long. And in those 100 pages, it has just about everything that the basics, that you need to know. So I'd really recommend those books.
Yeah, in fact, you gave that or suggested that for our staff, and it really does encapsulate pretty much everything in a small amount of time, because there's so much written about the Enneagram in terms of how it relates to love relationships and work relationships and spirituality. I mean, there's so many different foci on what you can study about the Enneagram. So I liked that little book. And that actually has a test in the front of it, correct?
It does. It does have a test in front of it, which is a very helpful test. And there are various ways you can learn your Enneagram type, because it can be, as I said earlier, it can be sometimes hard for us to understand what our deepest motivations are. So when we read about one type, we may identify with that, but that might not really be our type because we don't really understand what's going on more deeply inside us. So a really good way to learn what your type is to do that test in the Essential Enneagram. There's also a number of tests online. Some of them charge money, and the ones that charge money actually do tend to be better, like the Riso Hudson test, which costs about $10 online, is a good test. Another way you can do it is just by reading and listening to podcasts or watching videos on YouTube to figure out what your type is. You can watch, for example, on YouTube or listen to a podcast of panels of people that are all the same type, and you can listen to how they talk about their experiences, and you can begin to resonate with that. And finally, you can go to someone who's trained to be a typer, to do typing interviews, and that'll probably cost you a fee to sit with them, and they'll interview you and be able to give you a choice of two to three or three types that you can then more deeply explore.
In fact, that's what you do. So
I do
how
that,
would you work with a person to do that?
It takes about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, and I sit with them. I do it by Zoom or in person, and I ask them a series of questions and listen to how they're responding. And from that, I can come up with usually I'll have one type that I have a pretty strong sense is what they are, but it's very important. You can't really tell somebody what their type is. They really need to come to it themselves. So what I offer is some guidance. I'll say, I'm hearing this and it sounds like you might be, let's say, a type 8, but I'm also hearing some things that mean you could maybe be a type 1. So I'd encourage you to, explore those two types. And I give them a list of resources on how they can do that.
How has it changed you as a person and as a pastor as a result of your work in learning about the Enneagram?
Oh, thank you for asking that. That's such a great question. Well, for me, it really has helped me understand why I behave the way that I do, even when I'm trying to change a habit or whatever, and it's harder for me, and I get frustrated. I can understand. Well, this is what's going on. It's my vice in action, and this is just something that I deal with. As I said before, sometimes you can think of our Enneatype as being like an operating system, and we know that Macs behave a certain way. All the different iMacs in the world have a lot of different programs and everything that are on them and that are used by different people. So it might look different, but inside the operating system is still the same. And so I understand that my operating system is a certain way, and I can give myself grace that way and have more compassion for myself. I'm also much more compassionate, I feel, towards others, because I understand that they're not seeing more deeply. I understand that they're not seeing the world as I see it, that their types are different than mine. So it's really, especially during the pandemic, which was stressful for all of us, it my work with the Enneagram has really helped me with my compassion for other people and myself, and to understand what compassion really is too.
That's so interesting. I know with my fourness, which,
Mhm.
I learned about that early on as being just this kind of a longing. And so being able to stay in the moment and be satisfied and be fulfilled instead of reaching out and wishing for something that was in the future or would never be. That kind of doing the grief work around that and going actually even deeper has helped me as a person. And like you, Anne, in knowing different Enneagram types, I'm much less judgmental. I'm allowing myself to accept people for being different and not expecting everyone to be like me.
Yes.
Right? So, right. And knowing that there's like vive la différence, right? It's we need every different type, and it makes it joyful and a wonderful place to be when you have a variety of groups of people.
It's very beautiful. And thank you for saying that. I think it's really beautiful, and it's very beautiful for me to see, once I understand the types a little better, how people wear their type and live in their type. That's beautiful too.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I think, there's so much richness to this, and it's been around a long time, and it's been in different in different faith groups throughout history. Yes. So that's even a whole podcast, probably even in itself. But we could go on and do this. I mean, we did several hours here on staff, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. So we want to have you back to do more so that we can understand and appreciate each other on staff even more. But I thank you for your work and really encourage people to take a deep dive into this, because it can only help. It's almost like it's the way I found that it's different from the Myers-Briggs is that it's kind of like an ego exposer, but kind of like an ooh, it hurts so good kind of way. And so that it actually helps me accept myself and appreciate myself in the midst of self-discovery. So, Anne, how can people contact you if they want to learn more about your work? What would they be able? What should they do? And mention that book again, so that people can hear that.
Okay, I call it the Little Yellow Book. It's The Essential Enneagram by Dr. David Daniels and Virginia Price. You can get it wherever you get books, and I just think I buy multiple copies and give them away sometimes, but I encourage you to get that. And you can contact me at Anne Wright Coffman. Wright is WRIGHT. You'll give this email, and then that's at Gmail. AnneWrightKoffman@gmail.com.
And it's Anne with an E.
Anne with an E, and Coffman with a C.
Excellent. Well, Anne, I treasure you as a friend, longtime friend of decades.
Yes.
And it's really wonderful to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your work in this field, because it's so, so important. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you on our next podcast.
Thanks for listening. Roundhill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Roundhill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillcommunitychurch.org.